The last rays of sunlight crept through the window, creating long streaks of light on the floor. Jake sat on the old sofa, stroking the golden fur of Scout, the 12-year-old golden retriever dog who had accompanied him all the way. In the quiet space of his Manhattan apartment, Scout's heavy breathing was like a knife cutting into Jake's heart. He knew this moment would come. The veterinarian prepared him mentally 3 months ago, when he discovered the malignant tumor had metastasized in Scout's body. They said the dog only had a few months left to live, and now that time has come to an end. Jake took out his phone, trying to keep his hands from shaking. "Hey, boy," he whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "Shall we take one last photo?" Scout raised her tired brown eyes, but still sparkled with loyalty to look at her master. His tail wagged slightly, weakly but full of affection. The smell of disinfectant from the last medical examination still lingered on Scout's fur, mixed with the familiar smell of the dog that Jake had been with for more than a decade. He vividly remembers the first day he brought Scout home, a hyperactive puppy with clumsy legs and a heart full of love. Now, even though the body has weakened, that heart has not changed. Jake adjusted the camera angle, trying to capture the most beautiful sunset light. Scout rested her head on his thigh, a habit from the first days. A light clicking sound rang out in the quiet space. Jake looked at the screen, and in that moment, his blood froze. Behind them, in the dark corner of the room, there was a shadowy shadow. It wasn't the shadow of an object or a playing light. It had the shape of a person standing. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he realized the figure's outline was strangely familiar. Sarah? The name escaped his lips like a choked breath. Sarah, his sister, who died in a car accident 4 years ago, who helped him pick Scout from the animal shelter. In the photo, the figure seems to be smiling, reaching out towards Scout. Jake quickly looked towards the corner of the room. There was only darkness and an old desk lamp. There were no signs of anything unusual. But when he looked at the photo again, the figure was still there, clear and undeniable. Scout suddenly barked softly, a weak but excited sound. His ears perked up, his eyes turned towards the corner of the room. Jake felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. In all the years since Sarah had left, he had never felt his sister's presence so clearly. The room suddenly became strangely cold, even though the last rays of sunlight were still pouring in through the window. Jake could hear the hum of traffic outside in Manhattan, the hum of the air conditioner, and another sound, very soft, like the whisper of the wind. Or was it someone speaking? He tried to regain his composure, telling himself that it was just a lighting effect, or his imagination playing with his damaged mind. But Scout kept looking intently toward the corner of the room, his tail wagging slightly as if he were greeting an old friend. Jake stroked Scout's head, feeling the familiar warmth of his loyal friend. In that moment, the initial fear gradually disappeared, replaced by a strange feeling, as if he was being wrapped in an invisible, loving embrace. The sunset gradually faded, leaving the room in gentle darkness. Jake didn't dare turn on the light, afraid that doing so would ruin this special moment. He continued to pet Scout, listening to the old dog's breathing gradually become more regular. In the quiet space, memories of Sarah rushed back. Her clear laughter when she first saw Scout. How you always know how to make Scout stop barking every time there is thunder and lightning. In the afternoons, the three of them walked together in Central Park, with Scout happily running ahead, Sarah and Jake following, sharing stories about life. Jake looked back at the photo on his phone. The figure was still there, but now it no longer scared him. Instead, he felt a strange comfort. Did Sarah return to pick up Scout? To let him know that his beloved four-legged friend will not be alone on his final journey? Scout groaned softly, shrinking from the pain. Jake hugged the dog tightly, feeling every weak beat of his loyal heart. Tears rolled down his cheeks when he realized the moment of separation was approaching. "It's okay, boy," Jake whispered, his voice choked up. "Sarah will take care of you. She's always been the best at it." In the corner of the room, a gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of violets, Sarah's favorite flower. Scout suddenly raised his head, his eyes brightening for a moment, as if he saw something that Jake couldn't recognize. Jake took out his phone again, taking another photo. This time in the photo, the figure is even clearer. He could recognize Sarah's warm smile, her arms outstretched as if waiting. Scout gently wagged her tail, her eyes directed towards the figure in the photo. The room was suddenly filled with a strange feeling of peace. The noise of the city seemed to subside, leaving only the sound of Scout's steady breathing and Jake's heartbeat. In that moment, he felt connected to both Sarah and Scout in an invisible circle of love. Jake begins to tell Scout about their fondest memories, about weekend mornings when they both jogged in the park, about stormy nights when Scout curled up next to his bed to protect him, about how the dog always knew when Jake was sad and needed a friend. Moonlight began to filter through the window, creating magical shapes on the wall. Jake continued to pet Scout, feeling the old dog's breathing gradually become weaker. In the quiet space, he could hear the ticking of the wall clock, counting the precious seconds remaining. "You're the best dog," Jake whispered, his voice shaking. "Thank you for always being there for me, Scout. Thank you for being the best friend a person could have." Scout gently licked Jake's hand, a loving gesture that he often did. His brown eyes looked at his owner with all the affection and loyalty accumulated over the years. Jake looked at the photo on his phone again. In the dim light of the night, Sarah's silhouette seemed even clearer. He could see his sister's warm smile and gentle eyes always filled with love and care. The surrounding space suddenly became strangely warm, even though the night wind was blowing strongly outside. Jake felt like an invisible hand was placed gently on his shoulder, bringing a deep sense of comfort. Scout suddenly raised his head, ears pricked up, as if listening for a sound that only he could hear. His tail wagged slightly, and in his tired eyes suddenly flashed a ray of joy. Jake tightened his arms around Scout, feeling every faint beat of his old friend's heart. In that moment, he understood that Sarah had truly returned, not to take Scout away, but to let them both know that love never truly ends, even when death separates them. The night gradually passed, and Jake still sat there, holding Scout in his arms, listening to every breath of his loyal friend. In the corner of the room, Sarah's figure is still present, like a silent promise that Scout will never be alone. Tears rolled down Jake's cheeks, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Grateful for the wonderful years he spent with Scout, grateful for his loyal dog's unconditional love, and grateful that in this difficult moment, he did not have to face it alone. Outside the window, New York City kept moving, but in this room, time seemed to stop. Jake continued to caress. Jake continued to caress Scout, his trembling fingers running through her golden fur, now faded with age. In the still air of the Manhattan night, Scout's breathing became heavier, as if each breath were a struggle. He felt a change in the air, a strange cold feeling seeping into every corner of the room. Scout felt it too, his ears perked up in alertness. Jake looked back at the photo on his phone, and his heart stopped when he saw that Sarah's figure had now moved closer, almost standing right behind them. The scent of violets became stronger, reminding Jake of afternoons in his parents' back garden, where Sarah often spent hours tending to her favorite flowers. Scout groaned softly, not from pain, but as if trying to greet an old friend. "Sarah," Jake whispered into the air, his voice shaking. "Are you really here?" There was no verbal answer, but a gentle breeze blew across his cheek, carrying with it the familiar warmth of his sister's arms. Memories rushed back like a waterfall. Jake remembers the day Sarah drove him to the animal shelter after he went through a painful breakup. "I need a real friend," Sarah said, a bright smile on her face. "A friend will love you unconditionally." And they found Scout, a puppy with big brown eyes and a heart of gold. Now, 12 years later, Jake understands that Sarah was right. Scout is more than just a friend. He is family, a source of comfort on lonely nights, joy on gloomy days, and the motivation that keeps him going after losing Sarah. Jake took out his phone again, taking another photo. This time, in the photo, he could clearly see Sarah kneeling next to Scout, one hand gently resting on the dog's head. Her smile is still as bright as ever, and in her eyes is boundless love. Scout suddenly raised her head, eyes looking straight at the point where Sarah's silhouette appeared in the photo. His tail wagged softly, and Jake could swear he heard Sarah laugh. The clear, warm sound he'd missed so painfully. "Are you here to pick up Scout?" Jake asked, his voice choked up. "Will you take care of it?" A gentle breeze blew, and Jake felt like someone nodded. Scout rested her head on his lap. Her breathing became softer. In that moment, Jake realized that this was not an end, but a new beginning. Scout will not go alone. Sarah will be there, waiting and loving him like the days he was alive. And perhaps, in some way, both will always be by his side. The moonlight through the window creates magical shapes on the wall. And in that dim light, Jake begins to tell Scout about Sarah. About how you always know how to make everyone feel loved. About your laughter as clear as silver bells. And about the boundless love you have for all creatures in the world. Scout listened, her brown eyes never leaving the corner of the room where Sarah's silhouette appeared in the photo. Occasionally, he gently wagged his tail, as if agreeing with the stories Jake told. As the night grew later, Scout's breathing became weaker. Jake hugged his old friend tightly, feeling every slow beat of his loyal heart. In the air, the scent of violets became more and more concentrated. "Do you remember, Scout?" Jake whispered, his voice shaking. "The afternoons we spent walking with Sarah in the park? The way she always brought you cookies, even though the doctor forbade it? The way she hugged you every time there was thunder and lightning?" Scout groaned softly, as if trying to answer. His brown eyes shone with a light, not of pain, but of peace and acceptance. Jake looked back at the photo on his phone. In the photo, Sarah is smiling, one hand still on Scout's head, the other as if beckoning. Scout looked towards the figure in the photo, his tail wagging slightly as a greeting. The space in the room suddenly became strangely warm, as if wrapped in an invisible embrace. Jake felt an incredible peace, a feeling he hadn't experienced since losing Sarah. "It's okay," Jake whispered, both to Scout and himself. "Sarah will take care of you. She's always been the best at it." Scout raised her head one last time, her eyes full of love looking at Jake. In that moment, Jake felt connected to both Sarah and Scout, in an eternal circle of love. Scout's breathing became as light as a feather, and Jake knew the moment had come. He hugged his loyal friend tightly, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Goodbye, my best friend," Jake whispered. "Come with Sarah. Wait for me there." In the final moment, Jake heard, or perhaps just imagined, Sarah calling softly, "Come here, Scout. We'll wait for Jake together." Scout gently closed her eyes. A small smile seemed to still linger on her lips. Jake hugged his friend tightly, feeling the warmth gradually disappear. But in his heart, a new fire was lit, the fire of hope and belief that love never truly ends. Outside the window, dawn began to rise, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the crack in the door. Jake looked back at the last photo on his phone, an image of Scout, of Sarah, and of love that transcends the boundaries of life and death. In the light of the new day, Jake understood that this was not the end. This is a promise. The promise that those we love will never truly leave us, that love can overcome death, and that somewhere, in another world, Sarah and Scout waiting for you, with bright smiles and unconditional love. Jake laid Scout down on his favorite blanket, stroking his now cold golden fur one last time. In the air, the scent of violets still lingers, like a silent promise that love will never fade. He stood up and walked towards the window, looking out at the waking city. In his heart, the pain is still there, but now it has been soothed by something stronger. The belief that love can overcome all boundaries, including the boundary between life and death. Die. And in that moment, as the first rays of sunlight shone through the window, Jake smiled. A tearful but hopeful smile, because he knows that somewhere, Sarah and Scout are waiting for him together, in a world where love never ends. In the corner of the room, a gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of violets, like a goodbye, like a promise of a future meeting. Jake closed his eyes, letting the beautiful memories of Sarah and Scout flood his soul, knowing that even though they were no longer physically together, their love would forever live in his heart. The following days passed in a fog of pain and memories. Jake kept his phone with him, frequently opening up the last photos with Scout. Every time he looked at Sarah's silhouette in the photo, he felt a strange, warm feeling spreading in his chest, somewhat easing the pain of loss. The apartment in Manhattan is now frighteningly empty. There was no more sound of claws tapping lightly on the wooden floor, no more sound of Scout's regular breathing at night, no more anyone waiting for him every time he returned home. Jake often stood in front of the door for a few minutes, clutching his keys, preparing himself to face the loneliness inside. A week after Scout left, Jake decided to print out the last photos. He went to a small photo shop in the neighborhood where there was an old photographer named Mr. Chen. When Jake showed him the photos on his phone, Mr. Chen surprised him. "There is something very special about these photos," the old man said, his eyes behind thick glasses staring intently at the screen. "I've been doing this for 40 years, but I've never seen anything like this." Jake watched Mr. Chen enlarge the photo on the computer. Sarah's silhouette appeared more clearly on the big screen. "This is not a technical error or lighting effect," Mr. Chen continued, his voice thoughtful. "There is a special energy emanating from this image." In the small space of the photo shop, between the familiar chemical smell and the hum of the printer, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Mr. Chen told him stories about strange photographs he had encountered in his career. Inexplicable images. Moments that seemed to capture something beyond the physical world. "Sometimes," the old man said, "a camera can catch things that the naked eye cannot see. Not because the machine is better than the human eye, but because in special moments, the boundaries between worlds become more fragile." Jake listened, his heart beating faster as he remembered his last night with Scout. The scent of violets, the strange feeling of warmth, and Sarah's undeniable presence. It all made more sense, Mr. Chen prints out the photos with special care. On high-quality photo paper, Sarah's silhouette is even clearer. Jake could see every detail of her face, her warm smile, her gentle eyes, and her posture as if she was reaching out to Scout. "You know," Mr. Chen said, as he showed the photos to Jake, "in our Eastern culture, we believe that love can overcome death. Not in a spooky or scary way, but in a connection. A deep connection, a thread that connects souls who love each other." Jake held the photos in his hands, feeling their weight, not physically, but the weight of what they represented. "Do you think," he hesitated, "that my sister really came to pick up Scout?" Mr. Chen smiled kindly. "I think," he said softly, "that love is the most powerful thing in the universe. It does not obey the laws of physics as we know it. And sometimes, in special moments, it can create miracles." Leaving the photo shop, Jake walked on the streets of Manhattan with a different mood. The photos in the bag felt like a heavy weight, but a comforting weight. He stopped at a small park, where he often took Scout for a walk, and sat down on a stone bench. Flipping through each photo, Jake let the memories flood back. He remembered how Sarah always said that love was the only thing left after everything else was gone. At that time, he thought they were just the romantic words of a young girl. But now, looking at these photos, I understand the deep meaning of your words. A gentle wind blew, carrying with it the familiar scent of violets. Jake looked up at the clear blue sky of New York, where white clouds were drifting lazily. In that moment, he felt a profound peace. Not the painful acceptance of loss, but the knowledge that the people he loved were still there, in a different way. On the way home, Jake stopped by a flower shop and bought a small pot of violets. Placing it by the window, where Scout often lies in the sun, he feels like he is creating a small bridge between his world and the world of Sarah and Scout. That night, lying in bed, Jake looked at the photos again under the soft light of the nightlight. In the darkness, Sarah's image seemed more vivid than ever. "I can clearly see the way you put your hand on Scout's head, the way you smile at me through the lens." "Thank you," Jake whispered into the air. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting me know that Scout is not alone." A gentle breeze blew through the half-closed window, gently shaking the violet petals. In that moment, Jake felt enveloped in the invisible embrace of love. Love from Sarah, from Scout, and from the knowledge that death is not the end of love. Jake closed his eyes, letting tears roll down his cheeks. Not tears of sadness, but tears of gratitude. Grateful for being loved, grateful for the special moments shared, and grateful for the magical proof that love can transcend even life's ultimate boundaries. In his sleep that night, Jake dreamed that he was in a park filled with sunlight. Sarah and Scout were playing on the green grass, her sister's laughter mingling with the dog's happy barking. They waved at him, not to say goodbye, but as a promise of a future meeting. A month after Scout left, Jake began to notice subtle changes in his daily life. The pot of violets by the window is no longer just an ordinary ornamental plant. It has become a point of connection, a reminder of love that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Every morning when I wake up, the first sunlight shines through the pale purple petals, creating magical shapes on the wall. Jake often spends a few minutes sitting by the window, sipping coffee and looking at the last photos with Scout. Sarah's silhouette in the photo seems to change with the light, sometimes clear, sometimes blurry, like a dream. One afternoon, while cleaning out his closet, Jake finds Scout's old collar and a faded photo, an image of Sarah holding Scout when he was a puppy. looking at two photos side by side, one from the distant past and one from the last night. Jake suddenly realized something that made him shiver. In both photos, Sarah has the same gesture, her hand gently resting on Scout's head, a gentle smile on her lips. But the surprising thing is that in the old photo, Sarah is wearing a light purple sweater, the same color as her silhouette in the last photo. Jake hurriedly contacted Mr. Chen, the old photographer. When he went to the photo shop and showed him two photos, Mr. Chen slowly took out his glasses and wiped them, his old eyes shining with understanding. "In our culture," he said, his voice deep, "we believe that important moments in life do not exist in isolation. They are connected by invisible threads of destiny and love." Jake sat down on an old chair in the photo shop, listening to Mr. Chen talks about ancient beliefs about the connection between souls who love each other, about how love can create circles in time, connecting the past with the present and the future. "Perhaps," Mr. Chen said, "your sister already knew. Maybe, from the first moment she brought Scout home, she knew that one day she would come back to take him away." That thought brought Jake to tears, not from sadness, but from a magical feeling of perfection in the way everything connected. Sarah brought Scout to me, and in the end, she came back to make sure my loyal friend didn't have to go alone. That evening, upon returning home, Jake noticed a strange scent in the air. The pot of violets by the window suddenly bloomed, the light purple flowers emitting a sweet fragrance. The moonlight shining through the window created magical shapes on the wall. And in that moment, Jake felt like the room was filled with the presence of the people he loved. He took out his phone, opened the gallery, and started creating a new album. In it, he placed all the photos of Sarah and Scout, from the first days to the last moments. As Jake looked at the photos in chronological order, he began to notice a magical pattern. In every important photo, Scout's first day home, his first birthday, Sarah's last Christmas, there are subtle signs, a strange flash of light, an inexplicable shadow, or a thin mist appears in the frame. Jake understands that perhaps the boundaries between worlds were never as clear as we thought. Perhaps the people we love are never truly gone. They just exist in another dimension, still watching over and protecting us. He sat down at the table and began to write. Not a funeral letter or a eulogy, but a story. A story of love that transcends the boundaries of life and death, of souls destined to connect with each other, and of how sometimes, in the most special moments, we are gifted with a small glimpse of a larger world, where love is the only thing that lasts forever. As he wrote the last lines, Jake heard a familiar sound, like claws tapping lightly on the floor. He smiled without turning back. Sometimes, faith is the only thing we need to know that the people we love are always by our side. Outside the window, New York City continues to move. Neon lights flash, car horns echo in the distance, and life goes on without stopping. But in this small apartment, amid the scent of violets and soft moonlight, Jake found a beautiful truth. That love is, in a way, the only thing that exists forever in the universe. This pillar. He put down his pen and looked out the window. In the Manhattan night sky, stars sparkled like gentle eyes watching. Jake smiled, knowing that somewhere Sarah and Scout were also looking down at him with boundless love. "See you later," he whispered into the night air. "Not now, not tomorrow, but one day we will be together again." A gentle wind blew, shaking the violet petals. And in that moment, Jake knew he had found the answer to life's biggest question. Love is never lost. It just changes shape, from something tangible to something intangible. Form, but stronger. From hugs and kisses to memories and warm feelings in the heart. And perhaps that is the true miracle of love. The ability to exist eternally in the hearts of the remaining people. Like the violets that still bloom every spring, like the stars that still shine. Glimmer in the night sky, reminding us that the people we love are never truly gone.